Do Democrats need their own version of Donald Trump? The Democratic version of Trump. What would that be like? Well, there are a lot of people who are talking about how they think that the Democrats need to work on their charisma and they need to work on being more aggressive because aggressiveness is persuasion. It's powerful, it's confident. And there are people talking about how they think that, you know what, a little bit of controversy is actually kind of sexy to the American people. Yes, it riles people up. Yes, it gets the media talking about you in unflattering ways. But you know what? Some attention is better than no attention in the minds of a lot of people. So there are a lot of different things to look at when we talk about the question of whether or not Democrats would benefit from a blue Trump. The first thing that I think is problematic, though, is that Democrats are held to higher standards than Republicans. That much is obvious. People just flip out more when they hear that a Democrat said a divisive thing than when they hear Donald Trump said a divisive thing. They hold Democrats to a higher standard than Republicans and Republicans to a higher standard than Donald Trump. Donald Trump is held to the lowest standard in the country. He's got so many scandals, so many misadventures, so many follies. He's said so many outrageous things that at this point, people aren't really counting how many he's said, and people don't have that much energy. They don't have enough energy to be angry at every single thing he said. But when a Democrat comes along and says something outrageous once every 3 months, then since those outrageous comments are a little more sparse, people have more energy to be angry about them. People get mad. They go, oh, what? I can't believe they said this. This is so unbecoming. But with Trump, it's just like, oh yeah, I mean, he says crazy stuff. He's Donald Trump, you know. He's an edgy guy. He's an outsider. He's breaking the mold of a typical politician. Yeah, so he doesn't really take things a bridge too far in the eyes of the American people. Can Democrats really test those boundaries? I think it's possible. I think it's possible that a Democrat comes along that people just hold to a lower standard, but it's hard to imagine because the Democratic Party is just more scholarly, more intellectual, more well-behaved, more prim and proper, you could say. And I think that a candidate like Trump in the Democratic Party would attract a lot more ire from fellow Democrats who would be like, well, this is just unhinged and divisive. You know, it depends kind of what direction they take the Trumpiness. If they're going to act, you know, racist or sexist, then obviously they're not going to be welcome in the Democratic Party. If they're just going to be unhinged and aggressive without the Trumpian politics, then, you know, there might still be ire from fellow Democrats who say, well, this is just needless. This is just bullying. This is belittling. But, you know, other Republicans accused Trump of being a bully. Ted Cruz called him a bully and a coward during the 2016 primary. And you know what? Trump did just fine by being a bully. It worked out. But the Democratic bully has to kind of rein in some of the more outrageous aspects of Trump. They've got to be careful with saying stuff like, oh, you know, Jews who don't vote for me should have their head examined. That's something that Trump actually said. So the Democratic version of Trump, I think, is going to want to steer clear of those types of disastrous landmines because their party will actually ditch them because their party actually has standards. They don't just run any unhinged cretin. So yeah, there's that. There's also some history backing the idea that when Democrats act aggressive, they get wins. So I think a lot about the 1948 election and how it compares to the 2016 election. A different political party won the presidency in those elections. Harry Truman, the Democrat in 1948, beat the Republican Thomas Dewey. Thomas Dewey, a young man, I think he was 46 at the time, very polished, considered a guy of very good character. And Truman, you know, a little more snarky, a little more harsh, heavy-handed. And at the time, everyone thought that Truman was going to lose. There was that newspaper printed out that said, Dewey defeats Truman, and Truman was holding it up on election night victorious, you know, laughing because the newspaper got it wrong. And yeah, Truman's aggressiveness seemed to actually help him. He was willing to call out Thomas Dewey and call out the Republicans in Congress. He called them the do-nothing Congress. He was so aggressive. He was the Democratic version of Trump before Trump. Now, people were a lot more polished in the 1940s, generally, in the 1950s, and the media wasn't in the condition that it's in right now, where the media is just always focusing on the president. And, you know, if you're an American who regularly tunes into Fox News, CNN, or MSNBC, or even non-mainstream media, you probably don't go a single day without thinking of the president of the United States. But I think that back in the 40s and the 50s, people went by without thinking about the president of the United States fairly frequently. And Trump, the thing with him is he gets so much attention that if you're a remotely tuned in political American, you're going to be thinking about Trump probably almost every day. You just are. You're going to see the news. You're going to see the new Trump headlines about how he's gutting the regulatory state or something like that, going after DEI, how he said that this group of people that didn't vote for him is bad or whatever. So the Democratic candidate would need to be prepared to be in the press a lot. And I think they have that in them. I think there are some Democrats who have it in them to get involved with the media. There are progressives, and there's even a Twitter or an X account for this, encouraging Jon Stewart to run for the presidency in 2028. Jon Stewart, of course, being a fairly left-of-center guy, not down the line on every issue, but fairly progressive. Calls out both the Democrats and the Republicans pretty aggressively, but probably focuses more on calling out the Republicans. Mocks the media a lot, you know, not just Fox News, but CNN and MSNBC. He goes after everyone. And that's sort of like Trump, you know, because as much as Trump might be disgusting in his behavior toward the Democrats and, you know, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, he also is aggressive towards Republicans. He said that rhino Republicans are human scum back in 2019. So if the Democrats get someone who tells other Democrats to fall in line, that might actually be helpful. Because the American people are left-leaning on economic issues. They just are. And in fact, a blind survey found that 80% of Americans, without knowing whether economic policies were Trump's or Harris's, when asked about them, preferred Harris's 80% of the time. 80% of the time they were like, I like those policies. That happened to be Kamala Harris's policies better. So the American people are progressive on economic issues. They're down for someone in the Democratic Party who is ready and willing to actually fight. Fight unlike Joe Biden did with his Build Back Better programs. You know, he kept deferring to the parliamentarian, Manchin and Sinema, those two senators who were just thorns in his side the whole time. So there needs to be a Democrat that is actually willing to fight. Does there need to be a Democrat who's the blue version of Donald Trump? Again, I'm still evaluating it. I'm still thinking about it, but the answer is probably no. Having some features that Trump has could be helpful. We also have to be careful about Trump's just lack of knowledge, you know? Is it really that appealing to have a Democrat who just is so ignorant like him, who just, no matter what he talks about, he just sounds horribly uninformed? When was the last time you heard Trump talk about a political issue sounding intelligible and like actually really thoughtful? And I'm not saying like he always sounds stupid, because he doesn't always sound stupid, but he rarely sounds overly intelligible, and that's a problem for the Democrats. People are going to mock the Democratic candidate if they act like that, because Democrats are held to higher standards. People are going to be like, oh, look at this idiot, you know. Don't even get me started on Democrats' use of social media as well. Trump used Twitter in his first term so prolifically. He was so big into that. And we have some Democrats who love social media too, like AOC. And I'm not saying she's the Democratic version of Trump, but she does have a group of people who really like her, people who are progressive. And in fact, there were people who voted for Donald Trump to be president and AOC in her congressional district. So those voters exist. Those are voters who would purport to believe in really aggressive change. They would purport to believe in politicians being fighters. They want a candidate who's a fighter. And in Donald Trump and AOC, they see a fighter. They like the vibe of the fighter. They might not be that concerned about policy. Or to the extent that they were, they might have been economically progressive, you know? They might have thought, hey, well, I don't remember that much of what Trump was like as president. Biden hasn't been economically progressive. I mean, not in a super notable way, like if he got Build Back Better passed. So they're just like, you know what? Yeah, I'm a progressive. I'm going to vote for Trump and AOC. I don't know if they would say they were progressive, but my idea is that they would not be hardline right-wingers on economics. Hardline right-wingers would not like AOC on economics. They would vote against her, and yet they voted for her. And Trump, he has this magical ability. This is another thing, to sort of have people see what they want in him. Like if they're sympathetic to him and they have some different political opinions, they will work backwards from their conclusions to continue being sympathetic to Trump. So they'll say, well, look, I am more pro-choice than President Trump is, but at the end of the day, he does just want to leave it to the states. He doesn't support a national abortion ban. And in fact, he's gone as far as saying that some states are way too harsh in their statewide abortion laws and that abortion bans in those states are bad. So, you know what? I think Trump's all right, even though I'm a lot more pro-choice than him or whatever. So people look at Trump and yeah, they might impart what they believe onto him in order to keep supporting him. That's something that's pretty absurd. It's a difficult talent. Speaking out of both sides of your mouth can take you places, apparently. Taking a bunch of different stances on a bunch of different issues, which is what Trump did, can be helpful. He's been pro-universal health care in the past too. And I don't think there's anyone who still thinks that he is, because he's not. But it's something that going into the 2016 election might have led to independents being more sympathetic to him. Now, in 2024, I don't think anyone was under the illusion, even if they were voting for Trump, that they were going to get free health care as a result of his presidency. I think people were more concerned about prices and whatnot, maybe immigration as well. But there's sort of a talent in dabbling in a bunch of different areas of the political spectrum. Joe Biden was sort of like that, by the way. He's been a more conservative senator. As vice president, he probably moved to the left, you could say. He came out in support of same-sex marriage in 2012. And it was because of him that Obama ended up supporting same-sex marriage. So a little more progressive on social issues. And then in his presidency, although I do not think he ended up being super economically progressive, like by getting Build Back Better passed, he did some stuff like the Inflation Reduction Act, the American Rescue Plan, a very pro-labor NLRB. So, a little more economically progressive than you would have thought he'd have been. Not super economically progressive, though. What I'm talking about in a Democratic version of Trump, though, is one who's very economically progressive. Someone, who takes opposite stances of Trump politically, but behaves like him. So, someone who says, instead of trying to gut the federal administrative state, we're going to beef them up. Administrative agencies serve an important role in fighting for the American people. Republicans have waged war on them, calling them bureaucrats, accusing them of waste, fraud, and abuse. But all that they do is help regular Americans and help keep our government in order and help prevent, natural disasters, help prevent stuff like plane crashes that we've seen recently. So we're going to stand up for the administrative state. And yeah, that would be like the opposite of Trump, but they would say it in a way that's Trumpian, Again, it's like you got to be careful not to be too divisive, because even if you're a candidate who acts like Trump and, you advocate for good policies, if you act like Trump, I think people at some point might get sick of you, especially on social media and stuff. Remember, even Trump supporters were kind of like, well, I don't know about President Trump's tweets during his first term. That was like their go-to thing too, by the way, is just falling back on the tweets. Like, you don't know that much about the policy substance, do you? Within the Democratic Party, people are a lot more concerned about policy. They're a lot more technocratic. And that's going to make it hard for a Democratic version of Trump to win the primary. They're going to need to talk about policy a lot, but at the same time, be extremely charismatic. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. But yeah, sometimes the people who are most focused on policy end up being seen as very boring and very dull to the American people. So you've got to combine this really sharp messaging on policy, this messaging that appeals to the masses, that appeals predominantly to progressives, but can also get people in red states who feel left behind to support you, while also being super charismatic and not being afraid to be a little controversial, So in those primary debates, when the moderator throws you some cringe question or some tough question, being a little sassy, you know? Remember the way Trump talked to Megyn Kelly? And he did behave in a way that was misogynistic. And Democrats, that usually just doesn't suit them. They're not misogynists. They don't have it in them to act that way. But if they can just act a little sassy toward the media, I think their base would love that. I think they would. And I think that's some of the appeal of Jon Stewart is like, hey, this guy's going to act snark toward the media. You know, he's not like super toxic, I would say. Like, he doesn't go cursing at people in their faces. He doesn't call for using the American military on the enemy from within. So he's not toxic, but he's not afraid to be a little caustic, I think. He's not afraid to ruffle some feathers. I don't know if he's the Democratic version of Trump. I'm just talking about it because other people are talking about the possibility of him running. Doesn't seem like he wants to, though. So, yeah, Democrats kind of just have to keep looking. But, yeah, will the Democrats run their own version of Trump? It's a really interesting question to consider. Do you think that if they did, or, you know, if a Democratic version of Trump came up, they would make it through the primary? Let me know in the comments. Let me know if you think that the American people would be able to stomach a Democratic version of Trump, you know, after having 4 years of Republican version of Trump as president. Or would they just be like, you know what, they talk a good game on policy, they seem more progressive than Trump, they're calling out the Trump administration on everything that they're wrong about, like gutting the administrative state and being a neocon, so you know what, I'm going to vote for him. Maybe they'll say that. Maybe they'll say that. What do you think? As always, please like, comment, or subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. This has been The Morris, The Merrier, and I look forward to speaking to you in my next video.